Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Turbonomic's #1 active podcast, the Greg and Joe Turbo Show. Uh, Today I'm joined, as always, by my illustrious co-host, Greg. Hey, Greg.
Hey, I'm illustrious again. I like it.
I couldn't think of another word.
That's fine. We'll stick with it.
Yeah, I'll start writing them down.
Good.
Today we're super lucky to be joined by our resident cloud guru and Turbonomic product manager, Kevin Lamb. Hey, Kevin, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Super excited to be on. Thank you. Maybe next time I'm on, I'll be illustrious guru. Who knows?
This is true. We will add more and more adjectives
Yeah.
as maybe we could start, Kevin. Just give us a little background on sort of who you are and how you got here.
Sure, would be happy to. Been at Turbo for a long time now, so going on a number of years. Started out my career at Turbonomic as a sales engineer, so had the pleasure of talking to a lot of clients for a number of years around how to adopt Turbonomic best practices, etc. Kind of understanding their challenges and what they're hoping to get out of their hosting of applications on premises and in the public cloud. A couple years back, I made the switch over to, I like to call it the dark side, product management. So went from the side of talking with customers and identifying what could make the product better to being tasked with making it a reality. So I've been super involved in that, and I think it's been a fantastic transition for me and something that I've been enjoying ever since. So I'm excited to speak in the world of FinOps and public cloud and really anything that that comes to mind when you think about Turbonomic and public cloud.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the word FinOps, and I know that's sort of a super popular buzzword at the moment, right? It's very much in the now. And I think one of the big reasons we were lucky to have you on today is because I know Greg and I are curious to learn a little bit more about this concept of FinOps, and obviously you're probably the best person at Turbo to speak to about it. So maybe we could start with, just explaining, I guess, what FinOps is. Like, it's, again, to me, it's a buzzword. So help
Sure.
me understand it better.
Sure, happy to. I had the pleasure of going out to FinOps X. Luckily, it was from Boston, where I'm based. It was out in sunny San Diego last month. So had a great few days there. And what I saw at FinOps X was just an explosion of excitement and coalescing around this standardization on how to operate in the public cloud. The first annual conference was last year. It had 200, 300 people. This year it was sold out, had thousands of attendees, numerous vendors. So you're spot on, Joe. It's super popular. And this term, this FinOps approach and framework in order to really make sure that you're a custodian of the best practices around hosting an application, making sure it performs, and doing so at the least amount of money possible. And so what I see from a FinOps perspective is really the three pillars, which is inform, optimize, and operate. And really, it's all three of those things. Those are the three legs of the stool where if you lose one, you don't have a stool to sit on, right? You need all three in order to actually say that you've achieved, or at least are in the pursuit of achieving FinOps, right? And it is a pursuit, right? It's not something that can be done once and say, see you later. I did my FinOps transition and I'm done. It's something that's constantly evolving, given the fact that the applications are evolving, the fact that the providers on the cloud side are evolving. So it's ever changing. So it's something that you're always pursuing. And to define FinOps for a quick moment, really it's FinOps, right? So some people think it's just financial operations, think show me how much I'm spending, but really FinOps is a combination of both finance. But the ops side stands for or focuses on DevOps. So that's actually bridging the gap between different parts of the organization and have them speak the same language and be on the same page and row in the same direction and have the same goals and realize those same goals together. So, right, FinOps is bridging the gap between different parts of the organization to have a standardized framework around informing, optimize, and operating a best cloud practice, so to speak.
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
Wow. I was given the floor. Thank you, Joe. We hear from lots of people. You said it's exciting. You said that this is big right now. I got two questions when I hear you say that. Number one, why? Why are we here? Why is this so big? Why are customers so concerned with this? And then the second question, I'll just throw it at you, and you can answer them in any order you like. On average, how many people have got all three pillars, right? How many people get past like wrapping their arms around, this is my cost, this is what I'm spending it on, this is what it was before, this is what it is now, this is what I project it to be, and here's who's spending it. And then actually doing something about that, optimizing it, and then operating in that model and continuous improvement.
Sure. Yeah. I like that you threw me two questions, so I'll use the second question to maybe answer the first.
Good.
The second question really is, who's able to achieve this perfectly? And I'd say, probably as I framed it, nobody gets it perfect. I think the other thing about the three legs of the stool, to use another analogy for a moment, it's really an ongoing journey, right? You're walking, crawling, and running across this three different operations of this framework. So really what that means is there's steps in each one of those processes. So maybe some organizations are able to have a pretty robust framework around dashboarding, reporting, business intelligence, sending that out to users. Maybe other parts of the organization are doing a great job on cleanup. Hey, they are able to provide the best tagging strategy. They've got that all cleaned up. They automatically delete things. They automatically turn things off on nights and weekends. Other parts of the organization might be well on their way from an infrastructure as code perspective, CI/CD pipeline, where they're actually making any of that optimization, shift left up to the development stack. So, right, those are what sort of best practices look like in each one of those three different areas. But it's hard to say that everybody's doing all of those things all at one time.
Yes, you can go out, you can find these good behaviors in an organization, and you could probably make them poster children, right? And stand them up and say, these are the people that are doing it right, and sort of build your process around that because you already see it happening.
Right. And you raise a great point in that it's also decentralized, right? So when you think about application development, what we're seeing is both in terms of location, it's global teams working together and collaborating. And these teams are also somewhat focused on their own projects. They might be focused on QE and testing and dev. They might be focusing on SREs that are doing the operations of production. There might be other parts of the organization that are doing research. You might be doing other folks that are doing, even myself, product management, right? On my side, I might be utilizing cloud resources to do telemetry, to do testing. And so I have my own resources that I also have to be a good custodian of these cloud resources and adopt FinOps as well. So it's so decentralized at this point that
those requirements, it's important to understand, right? It's important to build a solution, to architect things, and put something to market based on the right levels of solutions and even the right technologies, because some of those technologies get really expensive really quick.
Yeah, right. And so even when I'm building out business plans on adopting new features, having folks build on these things, there's a cost associated with it, right? Yes. So it's not only just, hey, what is the total addressable market? What is the amount of revenue that we can generate? What are the amount of customers that would be delighted by this new feature? But also, what's the cost associated with storing a whole bunch of this data, ensuring that we have the back end available 24/7 from a replication perspective? Do we have the right amount of resources just in terms of compute to meet transactions and processing demand? And all of that has cost associated with it. So just from a business plan standpoint, it's something that bubbles up into the application and customer facing.
That's a really interesting concept. I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that I don't have a perspective around. Now I do, so thank you. As a vendor, we have to be conscious of the fact that if our customers are going to run this, they might run this software in a cloud, and it might cost them more than a competitor because we built it in a way that uses more expensive solutions, or maybe even stores way more data than is required, and they've got to pay for that data. So that's great. I'm glad you guys are being those good custodians of what you're building and what you're putting together for our customers.
Yeah, I think it's a key point for sure on developing. So
yeah,
absolutely.
And it does seem though too. I mean, just again, this idea of FinOps being so new, right? And there definitely being a maturity curve, and obviously different organizations are going to adopt it faster and so on. But I speak with customers today, and when we talk about when the idea of FinOps comes up, it always seems like they kind of get hung up on this first pillar. And maybe this is just a consequence of this being a sort of a journey, like you said, and this is just being the first step. But it seems like customers assume, hey, if I can understand where I'm spending my money and I have visibility, I am now FinOps. And I guess, and maybe that's not true. broadly, right? But just in my limited experience. But I guess are there ways to sort of help these organizations to like better understand that this is just the first step in a process? Or even I guess do you see it the same way? I mean, do you see that it's still like early days in that sense, and a lot of folks are really kind of still stuck on this first pillar, and it's the gap between pillar one and pillar two is really the leap, I guess.
Yeah, I think that last point is spot on, right? It's a leap, right? The first step, I would agree, right? Everybody's going to want to know where they're at today. If we're getting measured on, are we doing well? Are we doing poorly? The first way to answer that is with data. And so in order to answer that question, you have to point to, hey, I'm doing a great job. This is specifically why. And this is specifically why is dashboarding, visibility, reporting, informing on here's our cloud spend. I think there's a nuance to that though, in that it's not just here's our cloud spend, but also why are we spending what we're spending it on? So this is really where I see the maturation and the journey transition from here's our cloud spend to that spend is worthwhile. And so what I mean by that is not only just showing here are the different services and resources that we're spending money on, but let's say you're doing all of the best practices, cleaning stuff up, deleting, resizing, but your reporting structure shows that your spend doubled this past year. Now you're saying, well, shoot, what's going on? This isn't looking so good. Well, it might have doubled because at the same time that you're cleaning stuff up, you might be growing your business. You might be deploying new applications. You might be building new features. So your footprint doubled. And by doubling your infrastructure and also not doing those best things, meaning cleanup, resizing, optimization, your costs would have quadrupled, right? So what we're seeing here is, yeah, not only just from an informed phase of historical spend, but also putting it in context with how you're also saving money at the same time. And so what we're seeing and what we're working on here is also making it super clear that there are things that the organization is doing that is keeping that cost curve from exploding and exponentially growing. And so we would expect it to grow, and we would expect things to adopt more and more technologies, more and more services, new applications. And so we expect it to grow, but we want to do so safely and effectively.
Right, because spending money in the cloud isn't a bad word, right? It's not.
Right, yeah.
It's just about spending the right money and not spending the wrong money, right? I mean, we have to spend something, but it's about how do we manage that performance to cost ratio and put us in a good place while being responsible with the budget.
Yeah, I was actually, the reason I mentioned this is because I was on with a client last week, or no, 2 weeks ago now. And we somewhat naively, some folks were thinking about, hey, we can save you X. And the client was saying, well, I don't really care about saving X. I don't want to spend less necessarily. I just want to know that what I'm spending it on, I should be spending on, right? I want to reduce my amount of waste, not necessarily I just want to save X amount of dollars. I want to your point, be more effective with my usage of my spend. So I want to move and eliminate waste, but I want to not necessarily spend less money and then all of a sudden I'm not able to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish, the higher order bit, which is developing applications, resilient applications, best user experience, best transactions and response time for my business that I'm growing.
Yeah. Now, we in Turbonomic, we've got a pretty good view of the optimization pillar or leg that you've talked about from a workload perspective, right? From the actual things that are out there costing you money, based on performance, based on efficiency, based on what's the third word?
Compliance, maybe. Yeah, we see
Compliance,
that.
there it is. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Boy,
I'm glad I got you guys here. But not only from the workload perspective, but maybe from an app rationalization perspective, right? And the thing that tripped me on this that you were talking about was, am I spending my money on the right things? Am I doing the right things with my business? Are these applications that don't have user adoption but cost me a lot of money and aren't bringing any revenue back into the corporation, are those necessary? And do we have to keep those out there running? It is something that until just now, I knew existed, but I didn't associate it with that optimized phase. Is that where you'd put that, or would you put that more in an operate?
I would say it starts with optimization, right? And that's just seeing here's where there is waste, or here is where ineffective dollars are going to waste.
Yeah.
And so really what we see is tying not just the cloud services. Hey, here's an EC2 instance, here's an Azure VM, but more, here are the different services that are associated with this business application. So that's why really on our side, we don't just focus downstream on here are the cloud services, but moving upstream and looking at, let's take Kubernetes, for example. What we're seeing more and more is this shared model, right? So you might have a singular cluster. And so if you just look at it from a cloud provider perspective, you're just looking at an entire cluster.
Yeah.
And you might be spending a whole bunch of money on that. But within that cluster, there might be different namespaces, there might be different containers and pods that have been tagged associated with different projects. So that's why when you move up the stack, it's critical to actually associate this spend with this business application or with this service or with these componentry. So not only are you looking at a VM, but sort of that shared cost allocation model where even that one VM, or let's take a database is probably a better example. Hey, this one RDS cluster is being used by dev, test, and prod. It's also in different scenarios, let's just say, or by different parts of the organization. So it's key to actually correlate these applications is really the way that I would look at slicing up the data. It's not enough to just say these resources are spending or accruing this amount of spend, but these applications are accruing that amount of spend. And so there's a big gap between this application and this service. And so it's critical to be able to say this application is comprised of these services. And then you can just, feed the costing data in from those services from there. Right. And so, that's really where that gap comes into play.
That was a challenge we talked about. It was last time we were talking to Jeremy about on-prem with, you may have shared services being served from a specific VM or a specific resource. How do you capture, I make a change to this VM. I've got two applications on that VM, and you have a chargeback model for that VM that says the customer or the application team is being charged for the resources they're using. How do you charge that back equally when the VM gets resized? Is it based on utilization? Is it based on the demand that is needed? Is it based on which of these applications bring in more revenue? I don't know, right? And that's challenges that our customers are having to work through.
Yeah, it's spot on, right? And it's more of the application, it's transactions I've seen, it's utilization in terms of CPU. But then I think you brought up a great point, which I'm really seeing more cutting edge, but I'm seeing it start to move from, all right, transactions to these transactions service this amount of revenue, right? And I think that's now you're tying together the revenue with the cost and really getting that profit margin pretty fine tuned. So because you have both sides of the equation there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm sure all organizations are looking for that as well, right?
Yeah.
Let's tie this all together.
Yeah.
And then again, that kind of answers the question of, are we spending the smart dollars? And I guess that's the ultimate the equation to get you there, right? Is what does it cost us, and what are we getting from it?
Yeah, and then it's doing something about it, right? We talked a lot about informing and mapping it correctly, whether it's shared cost, whether it's looking at it by application. But then, okay, now what, right? We've got all of this information. I've never talked to anyone that says, okay, we're done, right? We have a report showing that we're spending way more than we were budgeted for this application. The next question is, so what, right? Okay, what are we going to do about it? So that's all well and good. We can feel good about it, but unless there's a change in operation, unless there's something realized, it's really somewhat for naught, other than just simply feeling good. And so that's really where that leap, Joe, that you mentioned is, okay, now we have to get buy-in to implement changes in the environment. And so that's what happens overall across the board.
Hey, Eva.
Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
I don't know.
We're doing it live.
We're joined by
No,
you.
you
Even I were
don't.
on the blast call.
I know. We're doing it live. I didn't see the PowerPoint, guys, and I really
that's
wanted
fine.
to
No,
start
no.
from the beginning of history, but
We were recording one. I think we're running over as well.
oh, I'm sorry. So you're gonna
We
cut
should
this
talk
out.
about. We
We're
should
not
do.
cutting this out. This is staying in. No, this is what the people want to see. They want to see
Reset
candid,
candid. Reset
real-life
candid.
stuff. This is it.
We should talk about what we were talking about before, Eva, right? How folks are looking at, and I was talking with Joe and Greg about how folks look at savings when it comes to discount models, right? When you turn something off, right? Kubernetes, how does that actually translate to cost? And that's on the surface pretty easy, but at the same time, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, especially if, and this is actually something that we want to understand from your viewers or your listeners, Kubernetes patterns kind of, we try to simplify something complex, right? And one of the easiest things to simplify is that I'm going to have a pattern that I create clusters, and they're going to be very homogeneous, right? Even in the public cloud where I get all that elasticity, what's the point? I don't really need to have, like, you're not going to create node pools that are going to have like size 1, size 2, size 3. What you may do is you may create node pools that have, certain unique compute characteristics for our special, our special workloads. But for the most part, the estate will look very homogeneous. Well, that lends itself to, I can leverage savings plans, because if 90% of my nodes are all M5 extra large, that falls right into the lap of savings. Well, if that's the case, then how do you measure cost benefits of elasticity? Deleting nodes, spinning nodes up, deleting nodes, spinning nodes up. We know that there's a performance benefit of, well, why run anything if you don't need it? But also spin it up when you need it, not when you just got a pod pending, right? We can all talk about those kinds of benefits. But then isn't the cost zero? Is the cost zero?
That's what I was asking, right? If you delete something
Yeah.
and you're fully covered, do you actually save any money, right? Or
Yeah.
is the money saved? Greg highlighted it. That savings plan is probably going somewhere else. But where is
But
it
that's what
going?
you hope. Where's it
Where do
going?
you hope, right? Right. Where's it
Yeah.
going is what Greg brought up. And so then you need to know, hey, what are the other instances that can take advantage of that? Are they also up at the same time? Or do you have another node group that is all of a sudden empty or has way fewer nodes, but maybe later today it might spin up and start using that. So it's not as easy as you'd look at,
Right.
right?
Actually, applications that have kind of a follow the sun model, one could argue that what we are doing is kind of potentially cross clusters. So this is where the lens has to really broaden, and looking at an individual instance is not the right thing, right? And that's what you and I were talking about earlier, that if I have an application that's a little bit like follow the sun model, and I think JB Hunt's a public reference, so we could talk about them. They scale out their clusters in the East Coast because those truck drivers wake up first, and but then where are you saving? If you spin down, then you're saving because then you spin up the capacity where you need it in the geography that you need it, right? So maybe the story for Turbo is that we have a little bit more intelligence to help you sweat the assets that you have. And when we bring up capacity, we're bringing up to assure performance, not just react to a pod pending, because actually the nodes are not, the nodes are defragmented. We probably could have accommodated that pod somewhere else if we were moving things around very nicely with Turbo. But that's a hard story to paint in just a widget.
Yeah.
Yeah, also it's connecting so many dots to your point. There's no way that you can look at just your own cluster or up the stack, even inside a node group,
Yeah,
and then just focus on that exclusively, right? And then also
right.
understand across, a savings plan might be even in a different account, right? Somebody else might be making that decision somewhere even beyond that. And so I think you make a great point that it's more global, right? It's not enough to just consider one change, but when you make one change, what the ripple effect is elsewhere, so that it's on the one hand, there's no savings if you have 100% coverage because you already sunk a commitment
Right.
for a year, right? There's technically $0 worth of savings. But is that the best way of looking at it if there's also a downstream effect where that savings plan might be covering someone else's environment as well? So it's the question of just looking at it holistically or charging back specifically to a group.
Yeah, and who bought that savings plan, right? Who gets the benefit from that? Was it
Yeah.
centrally purchased? Was it business unit purchased? Was it application team purchased? If it was, is it fair to take application team A and give their savings or their prepaid capacity to application B?
Well, that's it. In Kubernetes, it's typically not going to be an application team unless they're a single tenant cluster. In
Yeah.
a multi-tenant, you have someone making this decision. Now, in theory, what we could do is, I'm sure that the initial decision on the savings plan was based on this calculation of my clusters, I need 5 of them and they each need 100 nodes. Why do they need 100 nodes? Because I don't know how much they need, and I'm not going to be the one that's going to be,
Yeah.
my neck is not going to be on the line because there's an application problem. So there is a first level optimization that we do that, in theory, what it could do is really refine that negotiation for the second year, right?
Yeah.
That probably, that planning was done based on application owners giving their best guesstimates, which they put a buffer in. And then several application teams now all have their own little buffers. So now the buffers are building, right? And then the DevOps team goes, hell no, I'm not going to be in a war room on Fridays. I put another buffer. So now we've got multiple layers of buffer, and that first RI plan is probably compensating for lack of optimization. Year 2, that would be interesting to project that all this optimization that Turbo is doing, moving, sizing, spinning up, spinning down, on a whole, can you really do better in year 2 with your RI purchases? And probably the answer is yes.
It's interesting though, because it's what you described, it's a very human problem, right? Because this idea of like, I'm not going to be the one responsible. I'm going to add my little extra, and then it's going to go to this guy, and he's going to add his little extra. I mean, this is the same problem on-prem as it is in the cloud, as it is in Kubernetes, and it's really, I think, highlights sort of the power of software specifically talking about Turbo. Is, we're accounting for that human element and sort of helping you to remove that from the equation, right? To not have to sort of take these bad habits and add
Right.
more, add more. Because all that's out of fear, right? I mean, the reason that anyone does that
Sure.
is because they have no reliable way of guaranteeing performance. So
Right.
how do
So
we
Kevin needs to build a 2-year widget, right? This is your RI.
the widget is growing.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
hey,
So
we have
this
the
is your,
data for 2 years, right? There you go.
I think that's what we should say. Okay, you bought these because you had to, because you knew everybody was lying about their projections of consumption, and everybody's using allocation models, not utilization. But in year 2, you should be smarter now that you use Turbo.
Yeah. I think there's a third line, right? It's not only utilization. Okay, we're using what we needed this year, which of course you did because you're going to take advantage of all of that.
Right.
There's coverage, right, which is going to be hopefully pretty high and even go above 100%, maybe even because you cut in half. Let's just throw that out there, 50%. We'll see of the amount of nodes that you really needed. And then, but in year 2, there's the other one, which is just how many you bought, right? How many do you have over time? Maybe you had a whole bunch of RIs, and that's going down. That's a trend line that's going to be important to show overall our purchasing isn't as high as it needed to be in comparison with last year.
Right. Or what we need to do is run a plan, right? We run a plan, and if the Kubernetes environment, because it's so cool that everybody's doing it now, it starts to grow exponentially in year 2, right? My day finally came, 6 years, 6 years, but finally it came. But we should be also projecting that, right? That if you ran these clusters, you may have teams 50 and 51 and 52 now wanting to onboard into this greatness. We should be able to show someone that actually you didn't need to increase your RI coverage. You could run more apps. Those are the ways to spin it. But ultimately, I'm in violent agreement with Kevin. Tracking a VM is silly because it's ephemeral infrastructure. Kubernetes, finally, ephemeral infrastructure. So it has to be done at a higher level.
Yeah.
I have a question too, like about RIs and specifically about like needing to make better decisions with the RIs you've already purchased. And like, how does the sort of the news from Azure, for instance, starting, next year, the inability to exchange these things, because maybe that was sort of a band-aid that customers were able to kind of leverage to just exchange them and kind of, meet to meet whatever they needed. But moving forward, that's not going to be an option. So like the dollars you spend are the dollars you spend, and you have to be, very conscious of that moving forward.
You'll move your dollars to Google is what you'll do.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. We should track that, what we see with clients in January of 2024. But yeah, I see that as a nudge towards savings plans, right? That's really where they're saying, hey, if you want this flexibility, this elasticity, go over to savings plans. Now, however, those savings plan discounts are a little bit less, right? So you do get that flexibility, but come January, if you move 100 everything from reserve instances to savings plans, you're able to have that flexibility, but now all of a sudden your cost increase because instead of the 50-60% discount, now you move to savings plans and you're at 30-40% discount. So your spend is actually going to be higher just without doing anything. If you go from a reserved instances this year and then go to savings plans next year, have like for like, you'll spend more next year because the discount's less. And so that's really important. And this is what we were talking about at the beginning is I wouldn't call that waste, right? It's just the effectiveness of your spend is really what we're looking at. And whether we look at cloud services or in the Kubernetes world, it's where are the dollars going more from an application perspective, not just, hey, I'm spending X on the public cloud. It's now I'm spending this amount of dollars on these amount of resources. And it's translating to application adoption, this amount of users, and ultimately this amount of revenue, right, for those applications that are running.
Will Azure allow mix though? I mean, I could actually see if we have good information, if we have good historical information, we should be helping someone kind of plan
Oh, sure.
for that, right? Yeah, that there may be many things that they could still cover under RI just because we know we've optimized it and this shouldn't change,
Yep.
right? Much.
Right. Yep, exactly. Let's use it for the different use cases that it's applicable for, right? These VMs have been like this for a while. We're not recommending they're showing up as green in Turbo, as we all want every resource to be. They're showing up as green, and they're probably not going to change, and they're going to need to be around for the next year. Perfect use case for reserved instances. Those instances that have a sizing action probably shouldn't buy another reserved instance because we're about to change it, and we don't want to do any conversion across instance families. So that might be a savings plan. The other one that I would highlight too is maybe these are workloads that are dev test, where instead of just throwing discounts at it, savings plans or reserved instances, maybe we should park it, right? Let's use more of this on-off mechanism where we only pay for what we use, meaning it should be off the other parts of the day, nights and weekends. If you turn it off on the at night and you shut it off all the way on the weekends, that's 64% off just by doing that. And so those workloads, you might get a bigger discount than even reserved instances and savings plans. So it's hard to pick what are the right ones for these different types of workloads. But that application profile really dictates what's the best approach.
And that really illustrates the complexity of all of this, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's like you're painting the picture of just, how difficult this process of cloud optimization can be. And when we talk about large organizations with, multi-cloud, tens of thousands of workloads, like how do you manage that? I mean, it's
And I think it becomes even more complex with Kubernetes, right? Eva, I was talking earlier about, that's another layer above. It's not just, hey, how much am I spending on this cluster? But now it's within the cluster, that means a whole lot more now.
Right. The ideal scenario, in fact, dev is really a source of an enormous amount of churn, right? In fact, I like to start with dev environments with customers and just say, hey, you got any stateful services? Oh, yeah, we do. We got X%. It's maybe not high, but we got enough. And I said, here's your first savings point. You've got wasted storage. I guarantee you have wasted storage. Why? Because developers, no offense to any listening, you don't go out there and you don't clean up, right? You wait for mommy to clean up the kitchen. So, but it's also not really something you see readily, right? Your scope may be, your permission may only be to this namespace in this cluster. And when you deleted everything, you did kubectl get PV, nothing showed up, right? But as we heard from one customer, $1 million of unattached storage, all coming, it was actually $1 million, all coming from dev workloads.
Yeah.
Because when you're agile, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of churn. You're going to redeploy. You're going to delete. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. There's an enormous, and there's a rapid rate of change. And the cloud providers very kindly just hang on to stuff that you didn't know even existed.
Yeah.
I think to that would be very interesting, actually, even Kevin, for us as we watch the elasticity and the volatility more. It's more volatility of a development environment. What we have with the cloud and the Kubernetes perspective is the ability to do two things. We could, from the cloud side, give an aha moment. Here you go. By the way, you don't need to wait around 3 weeks to see if anybody, I guarantee no one's using that PV anymore. Just get rid of it. You're wasting money. You wasted money the 30 minutes after the developer deleted it, deleted their workloads. But also inside of Kubernetes, what we could do is we could start to move things around when it's a lull period, move, consolidate, and try to get suspension really working. It may be, I think in Kubernetes, there may be more of a tolerance of just delete the dang thing, don't suspend it. I think we have to investigate that. It is changing. Suspending a node hasn't been quite so much of a guarantee that when it comes back on, it's going to be part of the Borg. Sometimes it's a lifeboat sitting out on the ocean with no communication. I don't know what happens under the covers, to be honest. But that is something that we should absolutely advocate, but do it with a meaningful insight into the application, because most people suspend nodes just based on memory and CPU, and not an understanding that what you have is your database pod is sitting on this node. And when you deleted it, you force that database pod to go into the wind, and you hope it lands somewhere.
Right.
But you don't know if it will.
Yeah. You
Sure
hope your biggest worry is like latency and time for the thing to come back up somewhere else.
Time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But that's what Turbo does. When we move things around, we want to assure high availability and readiness. And that is something that you don't get from cluster autoscalers.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to save money. Right?
I keep hearing a lot of concepts, and it all seems to, like, I hear simplicity, complexity, all of this. It all stems or boils down to trade-offs, right? I can have the best performance in the world, but I may not be using it. I'm going to spend money for that. I could spin these things down and put them away for a while, but it takes time to bring them back up. How do you know what the right trade-offs are? How do you gain that insight to make the decision to base on, like, what am I going to lose? What am I going to gain?
Right.
And what's the end result? What's the outcome going to be?
I'm actually jealous of Kevin. He can actually answer that problem a little bit more simply from his perspective. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say, in my favorite world of microservice applications, I think it's a phased approach. I think everybody should try to build cattle, not pets, right? You should go for horizontally scalable. That isn't easy. Topology processor. That isn't easy to do, right?
Yeah.
So, but just because you built horizontally scalable doesn't mean that that you get a get out of jail free card to optimize each replica, right? But that should be done in development and pre-prod.
Sure.
This is also something that's been around as long as my gray hair, that if you're going to build applications, you should stress test. Just because it's containers doesn't mean you can just, I can deploy right into production.
Yeah.
Well, did you performance test? Nope, I don't have non-functional requirements. Thank you very much. Well, maybe you should.
Right.
And I think if people follow, which should be even easier in containerization, because the ease of building out these pipelines, the ease of I deploy and stage, I deploy and test, run some load, under load first, load up one replica, optimize that single replica, because just because you can horizontally scale doesn't mean that more replicas makes the performance better. CPU throttling, perfect example. If one replica throttles, they all throttle, people. More of the same doesn't make it better. And then in production, now you get the elasticity you want. You horizontally scale, and the horizontal scaling of the application should drive the horizontal scaling of the infrastructure. And that's how you save money, right? And you should be, by the way, horizontally scaling, probably based on some real KPI, not CPU and memory. Make it based on something more meaningful to the application. But with all the other services that you have attached, let's say you're smart and you didn't put your database on Kubernetes. Yes, I did say that. You probably should put your database as a real service. Then, Kevin, right? Then you should be challenging. Do you really need the IOPS that you asked for, right?
Yep. Yep. And then it's the age-old question of, right, I got on the cloud service side, right, you got options. You got hundreds of options to pick and choose from. Just pick the right one. Well, that's easier said than done. Probably going to change in 12 months. You're going to get 102 options to pick and choose from. And to Eva's point, it's going to change, right? You're going to have load testing to go against that. So you're also going to have to do that on the RDS side, the Google SQL side, the Azure Cosmos, take your pick, take your flavor. But it really, when it comes down to it, is somebody somewhere has got to pick what option that is best. And that's really, really tough to do. And the thing to use is software, right? That's why software exists. Make it easy to answer the question of there's 300 options. Which one do I want to pick?
Unfortunately, taking these actions isn't so disruptive.
Yeah.
I mean, look, everything, it all depends on the application. But I think what people should be less afraid about is making change, right? Because I think the cloud providers provide more capabilities of automating things, right? Should be less fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Now, of course, your application, right? If you have a transaction going against the database, if you can't drop anything, then okay, schedule it, right? Then schedule it and do it when it makes sense. But the cloud providers really provide so much elasticity, even in things that you wouldn't think are elastic.
Yep.
I think it's a shame not to take advantage of it. In fact, we found out that we got a backdoor with optimizing PVs. You spin up a PV, why, based on somebody's storage class, somebody had to decide. Should it be a GP2? Should it be a GP3? Should it be an IO, whatever? I even forget these things because I can always ask Kevin. But you guessed, right? And you guessed because you expected everybody who's onboards into that cluster kind of gets the lowest common denominator storage class, right? Okay, fine. Well, for this app owner, that was too small. For this one, too big again, right? The only thing that PV does is logging, and why you need a PV, I don't know. But I've got a little trick that on the cloud side, we get IOPS. The IOPS can govern what's the right storage tier, and you can make that tier change on the cloud side. Kubernetes doesn't care. Now, does Kubernetes thinks it's still a GP2 and now it's a GP3? Yeah, Kubernetes still thinks it's a GP2, but it doesn't care that it's actually a GP3 on the back end.
It just gets it, right? It gets the resources that, yeah.
Well, the definition of the properties, it doesn't need to change.
Right,
That's the point. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just takes advantage of that.
Take advantage of that, people.
Yeah.
You don't even have to recreate the PV. Now, if you delete it and you created another one, you're still back in the same boat, right? I mean, you're going to get whatever the storage class. But on the cloud side, cloud provider, you can save some money. And the
or just do it, to your point, do it every night, right? Make a quick change every night. Maybe it's not needed at that point in time. Every dollar counts, adds up pretty quick.
And the app owner doesn't know.
Yeah.
And I love doing things that the app owner doesn't know.
Yes.
That's what I do. That's what I.
Yeah, that's right. He goes in the back. Changes our development environment. Yeah. So it's funny that 30 years ago, you didn't have all these options, right? That's why you had ITIL and ITSM, right? Because a change, you change something. Oh my God, let's make sure we put processes around change. Why? Because change was very difficult. Monolithic applications that couldn't tolerate change.
Yeah.
infrastructure that didn't quite have the right knobs to tolerate. You didn't even have hot add, right? At one point in virtualization. Now you do. Use it. Use it. Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. There you go. That's going to be the thumbnail for the videos. Don't be afraid. It's perfect.
Good.
Yeah, but don't call me either. So don't
I was
call
No,
me.
no,
no
fine.
follow-up.
Fine.
That's good. I gotta say, obviously, you know, these episodes are fun for Greg and I, and this one was especially fun.
Oh, absolutely. Surprise guest.
Surprise guest was great, and that's all this is staying in, by the way.
Yeah,
So this is
absolutely.
going to be perfect. But I do want to be mindful. I know you guys are all very busy people and took time out to speak with us today. So I do want to say thank you for joining. This was a great conversation. We touched on a lot of different things. So I do just want to mention for all those people watching, you know, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Greg or myself. As always, we have more great Turbonomic resources on our community page. So feel free to check that out as well.
Comment, like, subscribe.
All the things. Feed the YouTube algorithm. It's very
Yes.
hungry. Yes. Yes. Greg and I are trying to become internet famous, so please help us.
Ryan, nothing. We're gonna do it.
We're gonna do it. But again, thank you, Kevin and Eva, for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it, and we hope to have you both on again in the future.
We will.
Yeah.
How can we avoid it?
Yeah. I'll bring my chickens.
Eva's just gonna pop in. You know what I mean? It's gonna be perfect. It's great.
That's right.
No, but appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great weekend. And we'll see you all in the next one. Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
Later.
Don't be afraid.